All right, we're going to look at simplifying our square roots and how we're going to apply it on the other part of your paper with the Pythagorean theorem. First, let's look, though, at number 1 and just remind ourselves. First off, square root of 4. What is the square root of 4? It is 2. It's a perfect square. Now, we talked about last week, talking about that it takes 2 to come out of the house. I'll explain that here with number 2, and then I'm going to show you, I'm going to work more with perfect squares and finding it out that way in just a second. On number 2, it says the square root of 8. Square root of 8, there's not an exact number. But if we go and we split up 8, I know that it can split up with 4 times 2. 2 is a prime number, so that one stays as low as it can go. So I put 2 lines underneath of it to make sure I don't get it confused. Now 4 splits up again as 2 and 2. All right, so now if I go and write all of this underneath the square root sign with the prime numbers, I have 2 times 2 times another 2. Now I had said that it takes 2 to come out the house. So 2 2s, there's 2 of them. They come out the house. And what that means is that outside the square root sign, outside the radical, it's a 2 square root of 2. Because that 2 that was left underneath there has to stay there. Now for you to check and make sure that you got these right, what you would do is when you go into your calculator and start with the original one, the square root of 8, you'd press second and the x squared button and you press 8 and enter. And it gives you a decimal. Now to make sure you simplified it right, you would go 2 second x squared, so put the square root sign, and 2. And press enter for what you thought your answer should be. They should be the same if you simplified them. Now if you don't, it's not going to tell you if you simplified it all the way, but it is going to tell you if at least what you've done so far is correct. All right, let's look at number 3. Number 3, if I look at 6 and I split up 6, it's 2 times 3. That's as low as they go. Those are both prime numbers. Well, if I write it underneath the square root sign, 2 times 3, is there a pair of anything to take out? There's not a pair. So as simple as it goes is the square root of 6. There's nothing else you can do. Now, talking about the square root of 20, okay? One of the ways that some teachers talk about it, instead of drawing them all out, the houses to the prime numbers, you can do this. If I write all my perfect squares out to the side, for example, if I did this, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4 all the way down the side. Let's see, I've got 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, 64. You could keep writing them out, but these are the perfect squares. So one thing that you can do is this number 4 says the square root of 20. If I look at my perfect squares, the next number that is lower than 20 is 16. If I take 20 divided by 16, does it come out to be an even number? No, it does not. It'll be 1 point something. All right, so that's not going to work. So what about 9? If I took 20 divided by 9, does that work out to be an even number? No, it's 2 point something if you put it in the calculator. So what about 4? If I put 20 divided by 4, does that work out nicely? It's a 5. So 20 is actually the square root of 4 times the square root of 5. The square root of 4 is a perfect square. What is the square root of 4? 2. So I have 2, and then I have the square root of 5. So you can go through and try and find your perfect squares and then write what's left. Again, to check it, you'd put the square root of 20, press enter and look at that decimal. Then you'd press 2 square root of 5, enter, and see that those decimals are the same. Let me try another one in just a second with the perfect square. Okay, so if I look over here, I'm going to write my perfect squares. It might be easier just for you to write it outside your, oops, let's do it like this instead of 1, 2. Let's see. I'll do 1, 4, 9, Oops, I forgot 16. 16, 25, 36, 49. All right. So like with 24, number 5 says the square root of 24. The next number that's lower than 24 is 16. If I take 24 divided by 16, it'll give me a decimal, 1 point. So for some of you that need to see that, again, I'm saying to take 24 divided by 16. It gives me a decimal. That doesn't work. So try the next one, which is 9. 24 divided by 9. Does 9 go into 24? Not evenly. 24 divided by 4. Yes, it does. It's 6. So I know that I have the square root of 4 times the square root of 6. That's the same as the square root of 24. Well, what is the square root of 4? 2. So you write 2, then square root of 6. To check and make sure you did that correctly, go and put second and the x squared and type in 24 and enter. Then go through and do 2 square root of 6 and press enter. They should give you the same decimals. Now, look on the right-hand side of your paper. And I want to go and start on I'm going to do the evens over here on this side. We're looking at right triangles. We need to remember with right triangles, we can always use the Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Please remember that C squared the C is the hypotenuse. It is the longest side, and it is the side opposite the 90-degree angle. The A and the B are just called legs, and it doesn't matter which one you use for A and which one you use for B. So, for example, on number 2, they have an X, and the X is across from the 90-degree angle, which is the hypotenuse. So for my equation, I'm going to have 7 squared plus 24 squared equals x squared. So now, to find out what x is, I'm going to go in my calculator. Let me clear it out. I'm going to put in there 7 squared plus 24 squared and press enter. That gives me 625. So I have x squared equaling 625. To find out what x is, I have to take the square root of both sides. Well, this is when I said that when square root is the opposite of a squared, so they cancel each other out. That's why I'm going to have x equals the square root of 625. So if I put that in the calculator, second x squared, 625. Oops, I put 24. Try again. 625 and press enter. My answer is 25. Number 4. Number 4 has a square root in it, which is fine, but I want to explain what y'all are supposed to do to remind you what you do when you square it. First off, we have to know, what are we looking for? Are we looking for the hypotenuse, or are we looking for the leg? We are looking for the leg. The hypotenuse is given to us. It's across from the right angle. It's the longest side. So I know my equation needs to be x squared plus the other leg, 4 square root of 3 squared equals 8 squared. Now, people all get themselves in a tizzy because we have 4 square root of 3 squared. Let's look at that and trying to simplify it. I'm going to have my x squared. Now, 4 square root of 3 squared. What does that mean? That means 4 square root of 3 times 4 square root of 3. So what you do, you take 4 times 4, that gives you 16. Well, the square root of 3 times the square root of 3. 3 times 3, underneath the square root sign, 3 times 3 is 9. What is the square root of 9? 3. So now you take 16 times 3, and that's 48. So we have x squared plus 48 equals 8 squared. 8 squared is 64. From here, we should be able to solve. When we subtract 48 from each side, x squared equals, what is 64 minus 48? It is 16. To find x, you have to take the square root. Take the square root of both sides. The square root cancels out the squared, so I get x equals, and what is the square root of 16? You should get 4, and that's your answer. Let's look at number 6. Number 6, first off, I need to figure out what is it that I'm looking for. Remember, I've got a squared plus b squared equals c squared. The x is down on this bottom side. It's across from the 90-degree angle. That means that it's my c. So 3 and the square root of 10 are my legs. So I'm going to have 3 squared plus the square root of 10 squared equals x squared. Well, 3 squared is 3 times 3, which is 9, plus I have the square root of 10 squared. The squared and the square root get rid of each other. It ends up being plus 10. To write it out a little bit more for you, remember that if you have the square root of 10 squared, that means the square root of 10 times the square root of 10. Well, 10 times 10 is 100. What is the square root of 100? 10. If you notice the shortcut when you're multiplying two square roots right here and it's the same number, remember it takes 2 to come out the house. That's where my 10 is coming from. So now I have 9 plus 10 equals x squared. To find out what x is, I have to take the square root of each side. Oh, I forgot. I need to do 9 times 10. So I got 19 equals x squared. So if I take the square root of each side, the x squared and the square root cross each other out, and I get x equals the square root of 19. Now, are there any numbers that multiply together to give you 19 besides 1 and 19? No. So your answer is just x equals the square root of 19. Now, if you look at number 8, they just give you the letters. They don't give you the picture. I mean, you can make the picture and draw it in. But if you remember, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So as I start here, I've got a is 9. So my equation, 9 squared plus b squared. I don't know what b squared is. So I just have b squared equals c squared. C is 15. Well, to find out what b squared is, I just subtract 9 squared from each side. And you could already square them if you wanted to. B squared equals. So as I go in my handy dandy calculator, I have 15 squared minus 9 squared, and I press enter. It equals 144. Okay? To get b by itself, you just take the square root of both sides. The square root gets rid of the x squared, or the square up there. So b equals the square root of 144. If you type in square root 144, you'll get 12. That means B is 12. Number 10. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. They give me A. A is the square root of 10. So I have the square root of 10 squared plus B squared, which I don't, oops, let's see, I don't know what that is. So let me rewrite that. There we go. Plus B squared equals C squared. C is the square root of 15, and I'm squaring that. Okay. When you're trying to simplify it, what y'all need to understand is that the square root takes away the x squared, the squared. So when those cancel each other out, I get 10 plus B squared equals. The square root takes away the squared, and it equals 15. So to solve this, I subtract 10 from each side. I get B squared equals 5. To get rid of my squared, I take the square root of each side, and I get B equals the square root of 5. 5 is as low as it can go, so when you go up here to B, your answer is just the square root of 5. For those of you in here with your papers, flip it over to the back. I want to give you a little bit of practice on a couple other ones. If I have 2 square root of 5 squared, let's simplify this. What does this mean? It means 2 square root of 5 times 2 square root of 5. So what you do is you multiply these numbers, 2 times 2, which is 4. Then you take the square root of 5 times the square root of 5. Well, when you do that, that's the square root of 25, which is 5. So then you take that number and you multiply it by the number we already got from outside. So you would get 20 as your answer. Try this one. 3 square root of 7 squared. So as you are doing that, you know that you get 3 square root of 7 times 3 square root of 7. The first thing you'll do is multiply 3 times 3 and get 9. Then you have the square root of 7 and the square root of 7. That's the square root of 49, which is 7. So you take this and you're just multiplying it by the 9. So 9 times 7, and your answer would be 63.